This is a story about the Opera House history from a book called A Time to Remember by Peter Luck, and it was published in 1988. And the title of the story is What a Place for a Tram Shed. This spectacular peninsula, so close to where the first fleet landed in Sydney Harbour, was originally an island. Even before the first convicts were brought ashore, Governor Phillip had landed 6 cattle and 7 horses there, and the place became known as Cattle Point. Later, after Phillip had, in inverted commas, domesticated the Aborigine called Bennelong, he built him a crude brick hut on the point. Bennelong died after a drunken brawl in 1798, but the place would eventually carry his name, Bennelong Point. In 1817, Governor Macquarie had the small island joined to the mainland, and then erected a rather imposing stone fortress on it. Fort Macquarie was eventually demolished in 1902, and replaced by, of all things, a tram shed. This bizarre edifice, complete with ornamental turrets, was itself knocked down in 1959 to make way for the construction of the Sydney Opera House. As early as 1948, the world-famous conductor Eugene Goossens had advocated an opera house for Sydney, and his idea was taken up by an unlikely crusader, the Labor Premier J.J. or Joe Cahill. Opera is essentially not a sport of the working class, and although there were a few votes in it for Joe Cahill, he pushed ahead with zeal. In 1956, his £10,000 international design competition attracted 216 entries from 36 countries. The panel of 4 judges chose a bold sketch of graceful sails by a 37-year-old Danish architect, John Utzon. Utzon, a disciple of architectural giants as Frank Lloyd Wright and Le Corbusier, started work on the Opera House in 1957. At that time, the cost was quoted to be about £3.5 million. But unfortunately, nothing quite like Utzon's plan had ever been built before. Utzon himself did not really know how his magnificent sails would be constructed, and soon, like Walter Burley Griffin before him, he ran into tremendous difficulties with the bureaucrats and politicians. As he and the contractors grappled with incredibly complex engineering, the costs began to mount. Soon we had a monumental architectural problem on the scale of the pyramids, except of course the pharaohs did not have the benefit of a pyramid lottery. The $100,000 Opera House lottery solved the problem of money at least, but the other problems seemed interminable and at times insoluble. The battles between Utzon and the authorities were complicated still further by different demands from the eventual tenants of the building, including the ABC. Halfway through the project, it was decided to change the whole nature of the interior of the building, and at one stage, $3 million worth of stage machinery had to be scrapped when the ABC demanded the main hall for its symphony concerts. The disputes went on for more than a decade, with the opposition in State Parliament finding the Opera House a wonderful weapon with which to bludgeon the government. When the Liberals came to power in 1965, Utzon had to deal with a new and tough Minister for Public Works, Mr. David Hughes. Hughes pinned most of the problems for the troubles on the hapless architect, and in February 1966 he made a move to downgrade him from controlling architect to design consultant. More than 1,000 architects and artists marched through the streets of Sydney in protest. Reluctant to continue as the centre of controversy any longer, John Utzon left Australia in April 1966 with his wife and family under assumed names to avoid publicity. In an interview in Denmark in 1972, Utzon told me, "I left with great regret. I fought for the perfect idea. I thought our work would be ruined, and as it actually has proven now, it is ruined. You cannot make a piece of art and let someone else finish it. Utzon has never returned to Australia. The job of finishing the Opera House was passed on to a conglomerate firm of Sydney architects, Hall, Steele and Littlemore. When the Opera House was finally completed, just in time for the Queen to open it in 1973, Utzon did not attend. The cost had risen to more than $100 million, and Australians flocked to the Bennelong Point in their thousands to see what the lottery money had bought. There was criticism that the outside and the inside of the buildings didn't match, which was to be expected since they had been created by different minds. But, on the whole, Sydneysiders loved the Opera House. Despite its flaws, it is a magnificent piece of sculpture. Like the pyramids, it is not so much a functional object as it is a decorative symbol. John Utzon is now in his 60s and an architect of international repute. In 1978, he was awarded the Queen's Gold Medal for Architecture for his design of the Sydney Opera House. His recommendation came from the British Institute of Architects, and it is said of Utzon at the award ceremony that he was the greatest architect of the 20th century.
Mooi lief, hè? Je kan zeggen goose en je kan zeggen